What would you do if the person everyone thought was prey turned out to be the predator? It all started on a bitter Wednesday afternoon, the kind of day where the fluorescent lights of Riverbend Women's Correctional seemed to drain the color from everything they touched. The reinforced doors of Seablock buzzed open as a new transport arrived. Among the shuffling line of inmates was Kelly McKinney, slight frame, quiet demeanor, eyes carefully neutral, dressed in the same prison-issued orange as everyone else. Yet somehow she seemed smaller, more fragile, easier to break. The guards processed her with mechanical efficiency, barely registering her presence. Other inmates glanced once, then away. In a place ruled by violence and hierarchy, Kelly didn't register as a threat. She disappeared into the background. That's exactly why Lorie Cox noticed her. Lorie was the undisputed queen of C-Block, 5 years in, built like an enforcer, with a reputation for breaking newcomers on principle. She'd clawed her way to the top through brutality and kept her throne through fear. No one challenged her authority, and she had a particular appetite for humiliating the quiet ones, especially the ones who looked like they couldn't fight back. Especially the ones who seemed to carry themselves with that careful, nervous politeness. So when Kelly entered the common area for the first time, moving with that cautious eyes-down shuffle, Lorie smiled. Fresh meat. But what no one knew, what no one could have possibly known, was that Kelly McKinney wasn't some scared first-timer who'd made a mistake. She was Shane Barnes's personal weapon, his most precisely trained operative, a ghost who had taken the fall by choice. For 15 years, she'd been forged into something lethal, expert in covert combat, pressure point manipulation, and silent elimination. She wasn't here by accident. She was here on assignment, serving time for her mentor while he orchestrated protection from the outside. Stay with me until the end, because this story will shock you to the core. Before we begin, hit subscribe, like this video, and leave a comment telling us where you are watching from. Now let's get back into the story. Kelly didn't speak much her first few days. She kept to herself, made her bunk with military precision, ate quickly without looking up, never caused friction. The guards nicknamed her the Mouse. In a facility full of shouting matches and violent outbursts, her silence made her invisible. But not to Lorie. To Lorie, Kelly was an insult waiting to be corrected, a challenge to her dominance that needed to be crushed publicly. 3 days in, during evening chow, Lorie made her opening move. She crossed the cafeteria deliberately, knocked Kelly's tray off the table with a theatrical sweep of her arm, sending food splashing across the floor. "Oops," she announced to the room. "Didn't see your little setup there, new girl." The cafeteria went silent. Every eye turned to Kelly, waiting to see how she'd react, waiting to see if she'd cry or fight or beg. But Kelly just stared at the spilled food, her face completely neutral, breathing controlled. She bent down slowly, picked up the tray with steady hands, and walked away without a word, without a glance, without any sign she'd even registered the humiliation. Laughter rippled through the room. The verdict was in. Kelly McKinney was weak, prey, a victim. And Lorie? She was just getting started. Over the next several days, the harassment escalated with calculated cruelty. Lorie would shoulder-check Kelly in the corridors, accidentally knock her commissary items into the trash, loudly mock her silence during rec time. Once, she even trapped Kelly in the shower area for 20 minutes, forcing her to stand there soaking wet while inmates filed past, smirking. The other prisoners watched with a mixture of amusement and relief. Better Kelly than them. And through it all, Kelly said nothing, did nothing. Her face remained that same mask of quiet endurance. But something was there, beneath the surface. A few observant eyes, one veteran guard, an older inmate who'd seen real violence, noticed the way Kelly moved when she thought no one was watching. Balanced, economical, like someone who was never truly off guard, just choosing not to engage. Like a coiled spring, pretending to be a broken toy, like a blade wrapped in cloth. Seablock had its own laws, and they were written in blood and broken bones. The official rules, the ones posted on bulletin boards and recited during intake, meant nothing here. What mattered was the code, the unspoken hierarchy that governed every moment of life inside these walls. Who sat where in the cafeteria? Who got the hot water in the showers? Who spoke and who stayed silent? Who lived comfortably and who lived in fear? At the top of that brutal pyramid sat Lorie Cox. She'd been inside for 5 years, convicted of aggravated assault that everyone whispered had actually been attempted murder. The distinction didn't matter to Lorie. What mattered was that she'd arrived at Riverbend already hard, already mean, and she'd spent those 5 years becoming something worse. She was 6 feet of coiled muscle and barely restrained violence, with a reputation that preceded her into every room. Her knuckles were scarred from impact, her eyes cold and calculating, always measuring, always assessing who needed to be reminded of their place. Lorie didn't rule through charisma or respect. She ruled through systematic terror. Every new arrival was a test, an opportunity to demonstrate power, to remind the population that nothing happened in Seablock without her permission. She had 2 primary enforcers, Janine, a wiry woman with quick fists and quicker temper, and Deshawn, built like a linebacker with a taste for inflicting pain. Together they formed the apex predator of the cell block, and everyone else was potential prey. The guards knew, of course. They saw everything and did nothing. Some were corrupt, receiving payments from Lorie's outside connections to look the other way. Others were simply pragmatic. Lorie kept order in her own way, prevented the kind of chaotic violence that required paperwork and investigations. As long as nobody died, as long as the injuries could be explained away as accidents or mutual combat, the guards let the hierarchy function. It made their jobs easier. So Seablock existed in a state of controlled brutality. The strong survived by aligning with Lorie or staying invisible. The weak survived by accepting their position, by paying tribute in commissary items or performing favors, by enduring the humiliation and hoping it would pass. Challenging Lorie was suicide. 3 women had tried in the past 2 years. One was transferred after a mysterious fall down the stairs left her with a shattered jaw. Another spent 2 weeks in medical after a laundry room accident resulted in broken ribs and a punctured lung. The third simply requested protective custody, admitting openly that she couldn't survive in general population anymore. The message was clear. Lorie Cox was untouchable. She maintained her position through constant demonstration. Every few weeks, she'd select someone, usually a newcomer, someone who hadn't yet learned to lower their eyes fast enough or had made the mistake of sitting in the wrong chair, and she'd make an example. The violence was never random. It was theatrical, public, designed to reinforce the hierarchy and remind everyone of the cost of resistance. Lorie had a particular system for breaking in new inmates. First came the test, something small like the tray incident, to see if they'd fight back or submit. Submission bought temporary peace, but marked you as prey. Fighting back escalated things immediately, earning you a beating that would hospitality you for days and cement your position at the bottom. There was no winning move, not really. That was the genius of her system. The cell block itself reflected this order. Lorie occupied the premium cell on the corner. More space, better light, fewer neighbors. Her crew controlled the phones during peak hours, the best spots in the rec yard, the front of every line. They moved through Seablock like royalty, and everyone else moved out of their way. Meal times were carefully choreographed displays of power. Lorie's table in the center of the cafeteria remained empty until she arrived. She ate first, took what she wanted, and only then did normal service resume. Anyone who forgot these unwritten rules received immediate correction. The other inmates had learned to read Lorie's moods like sailors reading weather. When she was calm, the block was tolerable. When she was bored, she went hunting for entertainment. When she was angry, everyone stayed in their cells and prayed she'd find a target quickly. New arrivals were always the most vulnerable. They didn't know the rules yet, didn't understand the invisible lines they shouldn't cross. They made eye contact when they should have looked away. They spoke when they should have stayed silent. They moved through space like free people instead of understanding that every inch of Seablock belonged to Lorie Cox. And Lorie never missed a new arrival. She had a predator's instinct for weakness, for vulnerability, for the ones who could be broken most easily. She particularly enjoyed the quiet ones, the ones who tried to disappear, because they provided the most satisfying transformations from hope to despair. That's why Kelly McKinney had caught her attention so completely. Something about that careful silence, that deliberate smallness, triggered every hunting instinct Lorie possessed. Fresh meat had arrived in Seablock, and Lorie Cox was hungry. 300 miles away, in a penthouse office overlooking the city's financial district, Shane Barnes watched a screen with the intensity of a man studying his most valuable investment. Because that's exactly what Kelly McKinney was. Shane had built his empire through calculated ruthlessness and strategic patience. He controlled shipping routes, owned politicians, and operated legitimate businesses that laundered money so efficiently, the federal government had been investigating him for 12 years without finding anything that would stick. He was 52, gray at the temples, always impeccably dressed, and absolutely lethal when necessary. But his greatest asset wasn't his network or his money. It was Kelly. He'd found her 15 years ago, a 17-year-old with nothing to lose and everything to prove. Orphaned, angry, brilliant, and desperate for purpose. Most people saw a damaged kid. Shane saw raw potential. He'd spent the next decade and a half molding her into something extraordinary, his personal weapon, his shadow, his most trusted operative. Kelly had handled his most delicate problems, the rival who needed to disappear without a trace, the witness whose testimony would have destroyed his legitimate holdings, the internal betrayal that required surgical precision to eliminate. She'd executed every assignment with flawless discipline, moving through the world like smoke, leaving no evidence, no witnesses, no connections back to Shane. She was worth more to him than any soldier, any enforcer, any consigliere. She was irreplaceable, which made her current situation both necessary and intolerable. 6 months ago, federal agents had finally gotten close. Too close. They'd traced a contract killing back to Shane's organization, had enough circumstantial evidence to start building a case. The walls were closing in. Someone had to take the fall, and that someone needed to be trusted absolutely, needed to be willing to serve time, needed to be valuable enough to protect from the outside. Kelly had volunteered immediately. She'd understood the strategy, plead guilty to a lesser charge, serve 3 to 5 years, and emerge with Shane's organization intact and her own future secured. He'd promised her the world when she got out, her own territory, financial independence, a position of power. All she had to do was survive inside. But Shane Barnes didn't leave his assets unprotected. The surveillance system had taken 4 months to install and had cost him $2 million in bribes, equipment, and expertise. He'd needed to compromise 3 prison contractors, 2 maintenance supervisors, and 1 senior corrections officer. The cameras were pinhole lenses hidden in ventilation grates, smoke detectors, and clock faces throughout Seablock. The feeds ran through encrypted channels to a server farm in Canada before routing to his personal monitors. It was completely illegal. If discovered, it would add federal charges to his file and expose his entire operation. He didn't care. He watched Kelly every day, during meals, in the common areas, in her cell at night. He tracked her movements, cataloged her interactions, assessed every potential threat. His people had compiled dossiers on every inmate in Seablock, every guard, every administrator. He knew their histories, their connections, their vulnerabilities. Lorie Cox's file sat open on his desk. 5 years for aggravated assault. History of violence. Outside connections to a mid-level drug distribution network. Family in the city. A sister, 2 nephews, an elderly mother. Financial troubles, gambling debts, a mortgage 3 months behind, pressure points, leverage, potential consequences. Shane had watched the cafeteria incident with clenched fists, had seen Lorie knock Kelly's tray to the floor, had observed Kelly's perfect restraint. He'd approved, intellectually. Kelly was playing it correctly, establishing her cover as weak and vulnerable. But emotionally, watching someone humiliate his asset made his blood simmer with barely controlled rage. The subsequent harassment had been harder to watch. Each shoulder check, each insult, each deliberate provocation was a test of his own discipline. Every instinct screamed to intervene immediately, to have Lorie Cox hurt in ways that would end her permanently. But that would expose Kelly's protection, would mark her as connected, would make her time inside exponentially more dangerous. So he watched and waited, his hand hovering over the phone that could unleash consequences, his jaw tight with restraint. But he'd made plans, contingencies. If Lorie pushed too far, if Kelly was genuinely threatened, if blood was about to be spilled, he had systems in place to respond with overwhelming force. Phone calls would be made, people would move. Lorie Cox would discover that touching Kelly McKinney carried a price that extended far beyond prison walls. The screen showed Kelly in her cell now, sitting on her bunk with perfect posture, face neutral, showing nothing. But Shane had known her for 15 years. He could read the tension in her shoulders, could see the way her breathing had changed. She was approaching her breaking point. He made a note in his phone, a single word: ready. When Kelly moved, when she finally stopped pretending and showed Lorie Cox who she really was, Shane would be watching. And in the aftermath, he would ensure that everyone in Riverbend understood a fundamental truth. Kelly McKinney was untouchable, because she belonged to him. Hit subscribe if you believe those bullies picked the wrong woman today, and comment justice if you're not siding with the prison bullies. The cafeteria operated on a precise schedule. Lunch service began at 11:30, with inmates filing in by cell block designation. Seablock went third, which meant the food was lukewarm and the good seats were already taken. Not that seating was ever really a choice for most inmates. The hierarchy dictated everything, including where you sat and whether you'd finish your meal undisturbed. Kelly had been inside for 3 days. 3 days of careful observation, of learning the rhythms and patterns, of cataloging threats and mapping escape routes with the instinct of someone trained to survive hostile environments. She'd identified Lorie Cox immediately, had noted her enforcers, had understood the power structure within hours of arrival. She'd also made a calculated decision: appear weak, become invisible, serve her time quietly. Shane's instructions had been explicit: do the time, stay off everyone's radar, get out clean. Drawing attention was dangerous, fighting back was exposure. So when Kelly entered the cafeteria that Thursday afternoon, she moved with deliberate meekness, eyes down, shoulders slightly hunched, the posture of someone trying not to be noticed. She collected her tray: mystery meat, overcooked vegetables, a piece of bread that could double as a weapon, and scanned for an empty seat. The room was nearly full. Conversation hummed at a low frequency, punctuated by occasional laughter and the clatter of plastic trays. Kelly spotted an opening at a table near the far wall, away from the center where Lorie held court. She moved toward it, keeping her steps small, non-threatening. She almost made it. Well, well, Lorie's voice cut through the ambient noise like a blade. Look who thinks she can just sit wherever she wants. The cafeteria didn't go silent immediately. It was more gradual, like a wave of awareness spreading outward from Lorie's table. Conversations faltered, then stopped. Heads turned. Everyone understood what was happening. Fresh meat was about to be tested. Kelly paused mid-step, her training screaming warnings that she forced herself to ignore. She didn't look at Lorie, didn't acknowledge the comment. She simply continued toward the empty seat, committed to the path she'd chosen. That's when Lorie stood. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd never been successfully challenged, crossing the cafeteria floor like she owned it. Janine and Deshawn flanked her automatically, predators following their alpha. They reached Kelly's chosen table just as Kelly was setting down her tray. "I don't think you heard me, new girl." Lorie positioned herself directly across the table, her presence overwhelming the small space. "This isn't your seat." Kelly met her eyes for just a fraction of a second, long enough to acknowledge, not long enough to challenge, then looked down. "I'll move." "Oh, you'll move." Lorie reached across the table and picked up Kelly's tray, slowly, deliberately, making sure everyone was watching. "But first, I think you need to understand how things work in Seablock." She tilted the tray. The mystery meat slid off first, hitting the floor with a wet slap. The vegetables followed, scattering across the linoleum. The bread bounced once and came to rest near Kelly's feet. "Oops," Lorie said, her voice dripping with mock apology. "Butterfingers, you know how it is." Laughter erupted from her table. A few other inmates joined in, the nervous laughter of people grateful they weren't the target. The guards along the wall watched but didn't move. This was C-block politics, below their pay grade unless blood was drawn. Kelly stared at her spilled food. She could feel every eye in the cafeteria on her, could sense the weight of expectation, the hunger for her response. This was the moment that would define her entire stay at Riverbend. Fight back and face immediate escalation. Submit and become permanent prey. Her training provided a dozen ways to end this. Lorie was overconfident, standing too close, her weight distributed poorly. Kelly could drive the empty tray edge into her throat, collapse her windpipe before anyone could react, or go for the eyes, the knee, drop her in seconds and establish dominance through overwhelming violence. Instead, Kelly took a slow breath. She bent down, her movements careful and controlled, and began picking up the spilled food. Her hands didn't shake. Her face remained perfectly neutral, showing neither fear nor anger. "That's right," Lorie said, her voice louder now, playing to the audience. "Clean up your mess, little mouse. Maybe tomorrow you'll remember your place." Kelly placed the food back on the tray, stood, and walked toward the disposal area without a word. She didn't hurry. She didn't look back. She simply executed the humiliation with mechanical precision, as if it meant nothing at all. The cafeteria erupted in jeers and laughter. Kelly McKinney had been branded, weak, prey, a victim. But along the far wall, Officer Martinez watched with narrowed eyes. She'd worked corrections for 18 years and had developed an instinct for reading inmates. Something about the new girl bothered her. Something she couldn't quite articulate, the way she'd moved when picking up the food, balanced, economical, like a dancer or a fighter. The way her breathing had never changed despite the humiliation. The way her hands had remained steady when any normal person's would have trembled. Martinez had seen broken people before. She'd seen scared people, angry people, desperate people. Kelly McKinney didn't look broken. She looked patient. The cafeteria incident had established the pattern. Over the following week, Lorie Cox demonstrated exactly what happened to prey in Seablock. It started small, almost playful. A shoulder check in the corridor that sent Kelly stumbling into the wall. Accidental collisions during rec time that left bruises Kelly couldn't complain about without seeming weak. Lorie would walk past Kelly's cell and knock her few possessions off the small shelf, scattering them across the floor while her enforcers laughed. Kelly endured it all with the same stone-faced discipline. She picked up her belongings, absorbed the physical contact, never responded, never reacted. To the other inmates, she was confirming her status as the block's punching bag. To Lorie, the lack of response was gasoline on a fire. Each non-reaction demanded escalation, required a bigger provocation to finally break through that maddening calm. By the end of the first week, the harassment had become more targeted. Lorie dumped Kelly's commissary purchases in the toilet. She convinced the laundry worker to lose Kelly's spare uniform, forcing her to wear the same orange outfit 3 days straight. She had Janine spread rumors that Kelly was a snitch, a child abuser, anything that would further isolate her from the general population. Kelly absorbed it all. Her training had prepared her for interrogation, for torture, for psychological warfare far more sophisticated than prison bullying. She compartmentalized the humiliation, locked it away in a place where it couldn't touch her core. She was completing a mission. The mission required endurance. Therefore, she would endure. But even the best training had limits. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon during the brief period between work detail and dinner. Kelly was in her cell, one of the few moments of privacy the prison allowed. She sat on her bunk, holding a small photograph, the only personal item she'd been allowed to keep during intake. The photo showed her and Shane at a restaurant 2 years ago, celebrating the successful completion of a particularly difficult assignment. Shane was smiling, genuinely pleased, his hand on her shoulder in an almost paternal gesture. Kelly looked younger in the picture, relaxed in a way she could never be inside these walls. It was her tether to the outside world, her reminder that this situation was temporary, that she had a life waiting beyond the razor wire and concrete. She heard them before she saw them. Footsteps in the corridor, multiple people moving with purpose. Kelly slid the photo under her thin pillow and stood, positioning herself in the center of the cell, balanced, ready. Lorie appeared in the doorway with Janine and Deshawn flanking her. The sight of 3 enforcers entering a single cell was unusual enough that nearby inmates went silent, watching through their bars to see what would happen. "Cell inspection," Lorie announced, grinning. "Heard you might be hiding contraband, Mouse." There were no guards nearby, no witnesses who would matter. This wasn't about finding contraband. This was about domination, about leaving Kelly with nothing. Lorie moved through the tiny cell like a hurricane. She flipped the thin mattress off the bunk, scattering Kelly's few belongings. She dumped out Kelly's small bin of toiletries, watching shampoo and soap scatter across the floor. She was thorough, systematic, making sure Kelly understood that she owned nothing, controlled nothing, had no space that was truly hers. Then Lorie's hand found the photograph under the displaced pillow. "Well, what do we have here?" She held it up to the light, studying it with exaggerated interest. "Look at this, ladies. Our little mouse has a sugar daddy on the outside." Kelly's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. A flicker of something dangerous that disappeared as quickly as it came. "Nice suit," Lorie continued, examining Shane's image. "This your man? Your lawyer? Or just some old fool who doesn't know you're locked up in here with real women?" "Give it back." Kelly's voice was quiet, controlled, but there was an edge to it that hadn't been there before. Lorie's grin widened. Finally, a reaction. Finally, proof that the mouse could feel pain. "Give it back?" Lorie held the photo between her fingers, teasing. "What are you gonna do if I don't, Mouse? You gonna fight me for it?" Kelly said nothing. Her hands remained at her sides, but her breathing had changed, become more deliberate. Anyone trained to read body language would have recognized the signs. A predator preparing to strike. Lorie didn't notice. She was too focused on her victory, too pleased with finally cracking Kelly's facade. "I don't think so," Lorie said. Then, maintaining eye contact with Kelly, she slowly, deliberately tore the photograph in half. The sound of ripping paper was obscenely loud in the small cell. Kelly's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Her fingers curled into her palms. Lorie tore it again, and again. Small pieces of photographic paper fluttered to the floor like confetti, Shane's face fragmenting into meaningless scraps. "Oops," Lorie said, dropping the pieces at Kelly's feet. "Butterfingers again. But hey, at least now you won't be distracted by outside bullshit. You can focus on your life here, in Seablock, where you're nothing but my entertainment." She turned to leave, Janine and Deshawn following, their laughter echoing down the corridor. Kelly stood motionless, staring at the scattered pieces of her only connection to the outside world. Her breathing was carefully controlled, measured, each inhale and exhale a deliberate exercise in restraint. But inside, behind the neutral expression, behind the discipline and training, Something had changed. The safety was off. Lorie Cox had a problem. And the problem was that Kelly McKinney still hadn't broken. 2 weeks of systematic harassment, 2 weeks of escalating humiliation, and the little mouse still walked around with that infuriating calm. She never cried, never begged, never showed any emotion beyond passive acceptance. It was like trying to get a reaction from a statue, and it was starting to make Lorie look weak. Other inmates were noticing, not openly. Nobody was stupid enough to question Lorie's authority directly, but she could feel the subtle shift in the block's atmosphere. Whispers in the corners, glances that lasted a fraction too long. The kind of attention that suggested people were wondering if maybe Lorie was losing her edge, if maybe the mouse was tougher than she appeared. That couldn't stand. In a place like Seablock, perception was everything. Any crack in her reputation could widen into a chasm, could encourage challenges she'd rather not face. She'd built her kingdom on fear and dominance, and Kelly McKinney's stubborn resilience was threatening that foundation. So on Wednesday night, after lights out, Lorie called a meeting. They gathered in the corner of the common area during the brief window when the overnight guards were changing shifts. Lorie, Janine, and Deshawn, the trinity that controlled Seablock. This wasn't a conversation for the larger crew. This was strategy for the inner circle only. "We need to send a message," Lorie said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "The mouse has lasted too long. People are starting to think she's tough." "She ain't tough," Janine said, always quick to validate Lorie's perspective. "She's just stupid, doesn't know when to quit." "Doesn't matter what she is," Deshawn added, cracking her knuckles. "Matters what people think, and right now they're thinking maybe she can take whatever we give her." Lorie nodded. That was exactly the problem. Kelly's endurance, intended or not, was becoming a different kind of power. The power of someone who couldn't be broken by ordinary means. "So, we stop being ordinary," Lorie said. "Tomorrow, during laundry rotation, the mouse is scheduled for the 2 o'clock shift." The laundry room was perfect for what Lorie had in mind. It was tucked in the basement level, isolated from the main cell blocks, with only one guard assigned to monitor multiple work details. The industrial washers and dryers created constant noise that would mask sounds. The steam and heat made the security cameras practically useless, their lenses perpetually fogged. And most importantly, accidents happened in laundry rooms all the time. Inmates got careless around machinery, slipped on wet floors, got into fights over missing clothes. "We go in heavy," Lorie continued, her tone clinical now. "Planning violence the way a general plans a campaign. All three of us. We corner her in the back by the commercial dryers. No audience, no witnesses who matter. We hurt her bad enough that she needs medical, bad enough that everyone sees the aftermath." "How bad?" Janine asked, and there was an eagerness in her voice that made even Deshawn glance sideways. "Bad enough to require stitches," Lorie said. "Maybe a broken bone. Nothing that screams attempted murder to the administration, but enough that she'll spend a week in medical and another month healing. Enough that when she comes back, everyone will see what happens when you don't know your place." Deshawn shifted her weight. "The guard's gonna ask questions." "Let them ask," Lorie said. "Prison laundry accident. She got aggressive, we defended ourselves, things got out of hand. Our word against hers, and she's the newcomer with no allies. Martinez might suspect, but she can't prove anything without witnesses, and there won't be any witnesses who'll talk." It was a solid plan, born from 5 years of institutional knowledge and previous successful operations. Lorie had orchestrated similar incidents before, strategic violence designed to look plausibly accidental, brutal enough to make a point, but calculated enough to avoid serious administrative consequences. "We go in fast," Lorie continued. "I take point, you two block the exits. I want her on the ground in the first 30 seconds. After that, we work methodically. Ribs, maybe an orbital bone, nothing that could be permanent disability. Remember, we're teaching a lesson, not committing murder." "What if she fights back?" Deshawn asked. Lorie actually laughed at that. "She won't. You've seen her. She's a mouse. She'll curl up and take it like she's taken everything else. That's the whole problem. She doesn't know how to fight back. Janine grinned. Tomorrow's gonna be fun. Tomorrow's gonna be necessary, Lorie corrected. This isn't about fun. This is about maintaining order. The mouse has survived too long, and that makes us look soft. After tomorrow, nobody will question who runs Seablock. They separated quietly, returning to their cells before the new shift guards completed their rounds. Lorie lay on her bunk afterward, staring at the ceiling, mentally rehearsing the next day's operation. She felt good about it, confident, in control, back in her element. Kelly McKinney had proven more resilient than expected, but resilience had limits. Everyone broke eventually. You just had to apply the right pressure in the right way. Tomorrow in the laundry room, Lorie would find Kelly's breaking point. She had no idea she was walking into a nightmare. The laundry room smelled like industrial detergent and steam. Kelly pushed a cart of wet linens toward the commercial dryers, moving with the same careful efficiency she'd maintained for 2 weeks. The noise was overwhelming. Machines churning, water rushing through pipes, the metallic clang of dryer doors opening and closing. She knew they were coming. She'd seen Lorie watching her during breakfast, had noticed the subtle coordination between the 3 enforcers during morning count, had recognized the predatory focus in their movements. 15 years of training had taught her to read threats. And every instinct screamed that today was the day Lorie would escalate beyond harassment. Kelly had a choice. She could request a schedule change, could find an excuse to avoid the laundry rotation, could maintain her cover for another day, another week, another month. But the photograph was gone. Her restraint had bought her nothing but increasing violence. And Shane hadn't trained her to be a victim. The choice had already been made. She continued loading linens into the dryer, her back to the entrance, her posture deliberately vulnerable. Behind her, she heard the door open, heard 3 sets of footsteps enter, heard the door close and lock with a decisive click. "Well, well," Lorie's voice cut through the machine noise. "Look who's all alone." Kelly didn't turn around. She finished placing the last sheet in the dryer, closed the door, and only then slowly pivoted to face them. Lorie stood in the center, Janine blocking the left exit, Deshawn the right, classic pincer formation, designed to eliminate escape routes. They moved with the confidence of predators who'd executed this maneuver before, who'd never encountered prey that fought back effectively. "You and me got unfinished business, Mouse," Lorie said, advancing slowly. "You've been disrespecting me for 2 weeks, walking around like you're tough, like you can just absorb punishment and that makes you special." Kelly said nothing. She shifted her weight almost imperceptibly, her feet shoulder-width apart, her center of gravity lowering by inches. To an untrained eye, she looked frozen with fear. To someone who understood combat, she'd just assumed a fighting stance. "I'm going to teach you about respect," Lorie continued, close now, within striking range. "And when you're in medical getting stitches, you're going to remember this lesson." She threw the punch without further warning, a heavy right cross aimed at Kelly's face, backed by 200 pounds of muscle and the expectation of easy connection. Kelly moved. It wasn't a wild dodge or a panicked flinch. It was precise, economical, a slight rotation of her torso that let Lorie's fist whisper past her cheek, close enough to feel the air displacement. Before Lorie could recover, before her brain could process the miss, Kelly struck. Her palm drove upward into Lorie's extended elbow with surgical precision, hyperextending the joint past its natural range. The crack was audible even over the machinery. Lorie's mouth opened in shock and pain, but Kelly was already moving, her other hand striking the exact pressure point on Lorie's neck that disrupted blood flow to the brain. Lorie staggered, her legs suddenly uncertain, her vision tunneling. Kelly swept her supporting leg and rode her down, controlling the fall, ensuring Lorie's head didn't hit the concrete hard enough to cause permanent damage. As they hit the ground, Kelly's knee found the nerve cluster in Lorie's solar plexus, applying precisely calibrated pressure that paralyzed her diaphragm. Lorie couldn't scream. She couldn't breathe. She could only lie there, gasping, while her brain tried to comprehend what had just happened. 3 seconds. That's how long the entire sequence had taken. Janine reacted first, rushing forward with a wild haymaker. Kelly rose to meet her, slipping inside the punch's arc, her fingers finding the pressure points behind Janine's jaw. She applied force in opposite directions simultaneously, a technique designed to cause immediate disorientation without visible injury. Janine's eyes rolled back. Kelly guided her collapse with one hand while her foot lashed out at Deshawn, who was charging from the right. The kick wasn't powerful. It didn't need to be. It connected with Deshawn's kneecap at the exact angle required to buckle the joint without breaking it. Deshawn went down hard, instinctively reaching for her injured knee. Kelly was on her before she hit the ground, her thumb finding the nerve point behind Deshawn's ear, applying pressure that induced immediate unconsciousness. Silence. Sudden and complete, broken only by the churning of the washing machines. 3 bodies on the laundry room floor. 3 women who'd entered as predators and been systematically dismantled in under 10 seconds. Kelly stood over them, breathing steady, her expression empty of emotion. She'd used minimal force, calculated strikes designed to incapacitate without causing permanent damage. They'd wake up in pain, confused, terrified. But they'd wake up. She looked down at Lorie, who was still conscious, still gasping for breath, her eyes wide with primal fear. For the first time since entering Riverbend, Kelly spoke with her real voice. Not the meek whisper of the mouse, but the cold, professional tone of an operative completing a mission. "You should have left me alone." She turned and walked to the door, unlocked it, and returned to loading laundry as if nothing had happened. Behind her, Lorie Cox finally managed to draw a full breath, and with it came the realization that she'd just attacked something far more dangerous than she could ever imagine. 300 miles away, Shane Barnes watched the laundry room feed with the focused intensity of a man witnessing his most valuable asset finally unleashed. The camera angle was poor, steam obscured portions of the action, and the positioning only captured partial views. But Shane had seen enough. He'd watched Kelly enter the laundry room, had observed Lorie and her enforcers follow with predatory intent, had witnessed the lock click into place. Then he'd watched Kelly dismantle 3 opponents in the time it took most people to register a threat. Pride and fury warred in his chest. Pride because Kelly had performed exactly as he'd trained her, with the precision and control that made her invaluable. Fury because the situation had escalated to the point where she'd been forced to reveal herself, to compromise the low profile that was supposed to protect her for the next 3 years. The camera feed flickered, then cut to black. The prison's automated system cycling between different surveillance zones. But Shane had seen enough. He picked up his phone and made the first call. "It's done," he said when the line connected. "Initiate Protocol 7. Protocol 7 had been prepared the day Kelly entered Riverbend, a contingency plan for exactly this scenario. Shane Barnes didn't leave his assets unprotected, and he certainly didn't let attacks go unanswered. He'd spent 2 months developing leverage against every significant player in Seablock, building files, identifying vulnerabilities, preparing responses that could be deployed with a single phone call. Lorie Cox's file had been particularly easy to compile. She was sloppy, overconfident, and her outside connections were embarrassingly transparent. The second call went to a detective in the city's organized crime unit, one of several law enforcement officials on Shane's unofficial payroll. "The package we discussed," Shane said. "Deliver it today." The package was an anonymous tip, complete with documentation, phone records, and financial transactions showing that Lorie Cox was coordinating drug distribution from inside Riverbend. The evidence was real. Shane's people had been monitoring Lorie's activities for weeks, but it would never have been discovered without directed attention. Now that attention would arrive with the force of a federal investigation. The third call was to a lawyer who specialized in prisoner advocacy and civil rights. "I need you to file a formal complaint," Shane instructed. Inmate Kelly McKinney, Riverbend Women's Correctional, has been subjected to systematic harassment and assault. I want it documented, investigated, and elevated to the State Corrections Board. This call served dual purposes. It established Kelly as a victim, creating a protective legal framework around her. More importantly, it would trigger an administrative review of Seablock's management, raising questions about how Lorie Cox had been allowed to operate with such impunity. The fourth call went to a bail bondsman with connections to Lorie's family. "The debt we purchased last month," Shane said. "Accelerate collection. Full amount. Due immediately." Lorie's sister owed $18,000 to various creditors: medical bills, credit cards, a predatory payday loan. Shane had quietly bought that debt through shell companies, consolidating it into a single crushing obligation. The sister's wages would be garnished, her assets threatened with seizure, her financial stability destroyed. The message would be clear: touching Kelly McKinney carried consequences that extended to everyone you loved. The fifth call was the most direct. It went to a corrections officer at Riverbend, one whose gambling addiction made him perpetually desperate for cash. "Tomorrow morning," Shane said, "you're going to discover contraband in Lorie Cox's cell. A shank, drugs, whatever you have available. Make sure it's documented properly." This would be the final nail. Combined with the drug distribution investigation, the formal complaint, and the laundry room incident, Lorie would be transferred to maximum security within 72 hours. Her reign over Seablock would end not with a dramatic confrontation, but with bureaucratic inevitability. Shane made 3 more calls, each activating a different pressure point, each designed to create the appearance of natural consequences while ensuring Lorie Cox's complete destruction. Her lawyer would face ethics complaints. Her appeal would mysteriously stall. Her prison commissary accounts would be frozen pending investigation. By the time he finished, the machinery was in motion. Tomorrow, Lorie Cox would wake up to a nightmare. She'd be investigated, searched, charged with additional crimes, and removed from general population. She'd spend the rest of her sentence in isolation, wondering how everything had collapsed so quickly, so completely. She'd never know that touching Kelly McKinney had triggered a response orchestrated from 300 miles away by a man who viewed her as property worth protecting at any cost. Shane sat back in his chair, reviewing the files on his desk. The entire operation had taken 20 minutes and would cost him approximately $300,000 in bribes, legal fees, and purchased debt. A small price for maintaining his assets' security. His phone buzzed with a secure message from inside Riverbend. The text was brief. 3 in medical, no permanent damage, subject returned to rotation. Shane allowed himself a thin smile. Kelly had controlled herself perfectly, had used exactly enough force to establish dominance without creating a murder investigation. She was everything he'd trained her to be. Tomorrow, when Lorie Cox's world began crumbling, everyone in Seablock would understand a fundamental truth. Kelly McKinney was untouchable. Not because of what she could do to you inside, but because of what would happen to you outside. Officer Martinez found them 20 minutes after the incident, lying on the laundry room floor in various states of consciousness and pain. Lorie was awake but dazed, cradling her hyperextended elbow, her breathing shallow and pained. Janine had regained consciousness but couldn't stand without assistance, her balance compromised by whatever had happened to her nervous system. Deshawn was just coming to, her knee swollen to twice its normal size, confusion written across her face. Martinez called for medical backup and secured the scene with the efficiency of someone who'd handled prison violence for nearly 2 decades. But as she waited for the medical team, she studied the women on the floor with professional curiosity. 3 experienced fighters, the most feared inmates in Seablock, taken down in a room with only one other person present, the same person they'd been targeting for 2 weeks, the same person Martinez had suspected wasn't quite what she appeared to be. The medical team arrived and began treatment. None of the injuries were life-threatening, but they were precise, almost surgical in their application. The kind of damage that spoke to training rather than wild brawling. Martinez made detailed notes, knowing this incident would trigger investigations she couldn't predict. By evening, word had spread through Seablock like wildfire. The Queen and her enforcers had gone after the mouse and had been carried out on stretchers. Theories proliferated. Kelly had a weapon. Kelly had accomplices. Kelly had somehow gotten lucky. But none of those theories explained the fear in Lorie's eyes or the way Janine refused to talk about what had happened. The truth was simpler and more terrifying. Kelly McKinney wasn't prey. The next morning, the machinery Shane had set in motion arrived at Riverbend. Federal agents appeared at 7 a.m., accompanied by state corrections investigators. They went directly to Lorie's cell, where they executed a search warrant that uncovered a smuggled cell phone, 3 grams of methamphetamine, and a weapon fashioned from a sharpened toothbrush. The contraband had been planted 12 hours earlier by a corrections officer who needed gambling money, but no one would ever prove that. Lorie was taken into custody immediately, separated from general population, and placed in administrative segregation pending investigation. She protested, screamed that she was being set up, demanded to speak with her lawyer. No one listened. The formal complaint filed by Kelly McKinney's attorney arrived simultaneously, detailing 2 weeks of systematic harassment, intimidation, and culminating in the laundry room assault. The complaint was professionally written, extensively documented, and impossible to ignore. It triggered an automatic review by the State Corrections Board. By noon, investigators were interviewing inmates about Seablock's power structure, asking pointed questions about Lorie Cox's operation, documenting years of unreported violence and corruption. Guards who'd taken bribes suddenly found themselves under scrutiny. The entire block's routine was disrupted by the investigation. Lorie's sister received notice that $18,000 in consolidated debt was due immediately, with wage garnishment to begin within the week. She called Lorie's lawyer in tears, unable to understand how her financial situation had collapsed overnight. Lorie's lawyer, meanwhile, received notice that the State Bar Association was reviewing ethics complaints related to his representation of several inmates. The complaints were vague but serious enough to require immediate attention, distracting him from Lorie's defense at the critical moment she needed him most. Everything was falling apart, and Lorie couldn't understand why. She sat in segregation, her arm in a sling, replaying the laundry room incident in her mind. The way Kelly had moved, the speed and precision, the complete absence of hesitation. It hadn't been luck. It had been expertise. But that didn't explain the rest of it. The perfectly timed contraband discovery, the federal investigation, her family being targeted, her lawyer being compromised. It was too coordinated, too comprehensive to be coincidence. Someone was orchestrating this from outside. Someone powerful enough to manipulate law enforcement, corrections officials, and financial institutions simultaneously. Someone who wanted Lorie destroyed not just inside the prison, but everywhere that mattered. 72 hours after the laundry room incident, Lorie Cox was transferred to Pelican Point Maximum Security Facility, a location 400 miles away that housed the state's most dangerous offenders. The transfer was violent. Guards used excessive force, citing her resistance, though she hadn't resisted. She'd be spending the next several years in 23-hour lockdown, with no crew, no power, no status. Her reign over Seablock had ended absolutely. Back at Riverbend, inmates processed the information with dawning horror. Janine and Deshawn, treated and released back to general population, refused to discuss the laundry room. They moved through Seablock like ghosts, avoiding eye contact, keeping to themselves, the fight completely gone from them. Kelly McKinney returned to her quiet routine. She worked her assignments, ate her meals, kept to herself. But now, when she walked through Seablock, inmates moved out of her way, tables emptied when she sat down, No one spoke to her, no one challenged her, no one even looked at her directly. The message had been received and understood. Kelly McKinney was protected by something far more terrifying than physical violence. She was connected to power that could reach inside the prison and destroy you, then reach outside and destroy everyone you loved. Officer Martinez watched it all unfold with grim satisfaction. She'd suspected Kelly was dangerous. She hadn't suspected Kelly was connected to someone who could dismantle lives with surgical precision. Seablock had a new order now, and at the top sat a quiet woman who'd never wanted the throne. 3 weeks after the laundry room incident, Kelly McKinney sat in the cafeteria eating her lunch in complete silence, not the forced silence of someone being shunned, but the respectful silence of subjects in the presence of royalty. The table where she sat remained empty except for her. The tables surrounding her maintained a buffer zone, a physical manifestation of the fear and respect that now defined her existence at Riverbend. She hadn't asked for this, hadn't wanted it. The entire point of taking the fall for Shane had been to serve her time quietly, invisibly, to emerge in 3 years with her mentor's empire intact and her own future secured. Instead, Lorie Cox's aggression had forced her hand, had required her to reveal capabilities she'd intended to keep hidden. But the result, Kelly had to admit, was preferable to months of continued harassment. She ate methodically, her movements economical, her awareness spanning the entire cafeteria without appearing to watch anything at all. Old habits trained into her over 15 years, habits that would never fully disappear. She cataloged threats that no longer existed, monitored exits she no longer needed, maintained situational awareness that was now unnecessary. Because no one at Riverbend would ever threaten her again. The story had evolved in the telling, as stories always did in prison. Some inmates claimed Kelly had killed Lorie and her crew, that the bodies had been covered up by corrupt officials. Others said Kelly was an undercover federal agent with immunity. A few whispered that she was connected to the cartels, to organized crime, to shadowy organizations that could make people disappear. None of them knew the truth. But the mythology served Kelly's purposes. Fear was a currency in prison, and she'd become the wealthiest inmate in the facility. Janine and Deshawn had been released from medical after 2 days. They moved through Seablock now like broken things, their confidence shattered, their status destroyed. They didn't speak about the laundry room. They didn't speak about Kelly. They simply existed, diminished and cautious, constant reminders of what happened when you picked the wrong target. Officer Martinez had approached Kelly once, 3 days after the incident, during a routine cell inspection. She'd looked at Kelly with eyes that saw too much, understood too much. "I don't know who you really are," Martinez had said quietly, "and I don't think I want to know. But whatever you're doing here, however long you're staying, I'm going to make sure nobody bothers you again." Kelly had simply nodded. Martinez was smart enough to recognize danger, smart enough to choose the winning side. That kind of intelligence would serve her well in corrections. The new power structure in Seablock had established itself organically. There was no dramatic coronation, no public declaration of leadership. Kelly simply existed, and her existence defined the new order. Disputes that might have previously been settled through violence were now negotiated peacefully. Bullying decreased dramatically. The weak and vulnerable found themselves unexpectedly protected by Kelly's ambient presence, though she never directly intervened. She'd become something between a deterrent and a myth, a force that maintained order through the mere possibility of her attention. 300 miles away, Shane Barnes continued his surveillance. The camera feeds showed Kelly moving through her daily routine with the same discipline she'd always maintained. He saw the buffer zones, the respectful distance, the fear-tinged reverence in other inmates' body language. Pride and satisfaction warred with concern. Kelly was safe now, perhaps the safest inmate in the entire correctional system. But she'd been forced to reveal herself years earlier than planned, and there was always a risk that someone, somewhere, might connect Kelly McKinney, the inmate, to the unsolved cases that dotted his organization's history. He'd tasked his legal team with exploring early release options, good behavior, overcrowding initiatives, parole possibilities. If Kelly could serve 18 months instead of 3 years, the risk exposure would decrease significantly. But for now, she was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she needed to do, surviving. Kelly finished her meal and stood, carrying her tray to the disposal area. Inmates tracked her movement with peripheral vision, careful not to stare directly, maintaining the respectful distance that had become standard protocol. She returned to her cell and sat on her bunk, staring at the wall where the photograph of Shane had once been taped. The image was gone, destroyed by Lorie Cox in a moment of dominance that had cost her everything. But Kelly didn't need the photograph anymore. She knew Shane was watching, knew he was orchestrating her protection with the same meticulous attention he applied to every aspect of his empire. She was his asset, his weapon, his most valuable investment. And she would survive this, just as she'd survived everything else he'd asked of her. Outside her cell, Seablock continued its evening routine. Inmates moved cautiously, guards maintained their patrols, the machinery of incarceration ground forward with mechanical inevitability. But underneath the routine, a new understanding had taken root. Kelly McKinney was untouchable. Not because of her skills, though they were formidable. Not because of her connections, though they were powerful. But because she embodied a terrifying truth. Some prey, when cornered, revealed themselves to be apex predators. And apex predators were never truly caged. They simply waited. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. Hit the subscribe button so you don't miss it. It's as interesting and even more intriguing as you can ever imagine.